Good evening. I think there's probably a lot more people that are still waiting to come in, but we want to go ahead and get started with our program since those of you who are already seated are probably wondering when we're going to get started. I'm extremely pleased to be here with you tonight, and thank you for joining us for this event that has been in the making for about a year and a half. My name is Michael Stone. I'm the CEO and founder of Milestone Investment Management, which is a independent wealth management firm here in Carrollton, Georgia. And together with my wife, Andrea, we are avid supporters of the Center for the Arts and also for the University of West Georgia. We consider ourselves to be ambassadors, if you will, for both the Centers for the Art and the university. We enjoy contributing to both organizations. Andrea serves on the Carrollton Arts Commission and has been on the Arts Commission for several years. I serve on the University of West Georgia Foundation as a trustee. And we take these roles very seriously in terms of how we can contribute to the goals of both of the organizations in terms of bringing value not only to the organizations, but to the people that they serve, which is the people of Carrollton. And so to see all of you that are here, it tells me that you all are interested in the arts also. And for that, I thank you. Some years ago, I found a book. It's called Art Thinking. And this book really caught my attention because it is, on the cover it says, How to Carve Out Creative Space in a World of Schedules, Budgets, and Bosses. And the author of the book is a woman by the name of Amy Whitaker. And I'm going to read to you about Amy Whitaker. She has a unique background in that she has a BFA from Williams College, an MBA from Yale School of Management, a PhD in philosophy from Goldsmith University in London. And when I read her book, I conveyed to Dean Pauline Gagnon from the university with the College of Arts, Culture, and Scientific Inquiry that this book really spoke to me in terms of the need for the university to offer an interdisciplinary study that united the Richard School of Business with those students who were in her college. And she thought it was a great idea. And she read the book also. And that was several years ago. But I have to tell you, by happenstance, after these years had passed, Andrea and I happened to be in Atlanta. And we were spending the night at a hotel in Atlanta. And we had gone to the lounge of the hotel after an evening out. And we ended up meeting this woman who was very engaging with us. And we got to know her. And she was telling me about her husband who had a MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And that he had been the chief financial officer of a Fortune 1000 company and helped take it public with an IPO. And he retired like at the age of 42. And then he pursued a PhD from a school in England specializing in Shakespeare. And the parallel between what she was telling me about her husband and this book, just all of a sudden, all the light bulbs went off in my head. And I told her, I said, I'd like to talk to your husband. Andrea and I are very involved with the university and very involved with the Center for the Arts, and I think we can possibly make an arrangement to have your husband come and speak to us. And so I gave her my business card, and the next day he sent me an email. And ever since that day, he and I have been corresponding either by email, text message, or telephone. And when I told him that I would like for him to come on campus at the University of West Georgia and work with the business students and work with the students in the humanities, he just thought that was a great idea. And I'm so thankful that a year and a half from that happenstance meeting that we had him here on campus today at the University of West Georgia as our executive in residence, working with our students, engaging them in conversation, telling them about his experiences as a business person and as a person who is knowledgeable in English literature, especially with Shakespeare. Those experiences for those students, I think, was tremendous. And tonight, you're going to hear from him, and I hope that you get as much excitement from hearing him and that you can relate some of the things that he has to say possibly to your life, whether you have been in business or whether you have an artistic mind. I think you're going to enjoy some of the things that he has to say. And again, I thank you for being here, and I encourage you, join us in supporting the arts in Carrollton. Let's do more programs like this, and I thank you for being here. Now I'm going to call on Dr. Chad Davidson, who's going to tell you a little bit more about our speaker.
Well, I had no idea that Michael was going to do all my work for me. I was about ready to tell you, Michael, just cut me. So bear with me. My name's Chad Davidson. I direct the School of the Arts at the University of West Georgia, but I'm also an English professor, so it's occupational hazard that I have to quote poetry. And I was thinking of something that I might quote tonight, and I thought of William Carlos Williams. How many of you know William Carlos Williams? It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. Isn't that an amazing quote? And I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, obviously what he means partly is that we suffer and perish when we don't allow into our lives the beauty and the art and the poetry and the mystery and the passion of art and poetry. But then I also thought maybe he means that we suffer and perish expressly for and in service of those things, because he says men die for lack. For those things that aren't in poetry and the arts, everyday experience, mundanity, the day in, day out existence, the unpoetic things, quote unquote. Or maybe more disturbingly, he means that poetry and art in general excludes us sometimes, that we're not allowed into that. We're not allowed access. So which one is it? As a mentor of mine once said, you know, the history of literary criticism, you can boil it down to one simple question. Is it A or is it B? What's the answer? Yes. And I think he's right there, and I think most professors at a university understand that ambiguity. You know, we play with it. We're comfortable in it. We revel in it. We know that we work at a university, which means we study and we interrogate and we celebrate the universe writ large. We study everything, right? We have astrophysicists right now looking into the furthest reaches of the universe. We have microbiologists doing the exact opposite. We have philosophers discussing the moral and ethical dimensions of that. And of course, we have artists and writers recording it and reflecting it and refracting it. We know this, I mean, it's what we do. But I'm not sure so many of us have lived it. That is, like, we're professors to the extent to which we've devoted our lives in a kind of dogged-willed obsession with an area of specialty, right? Not so David Weiss. I think he's something quite different, right? Sure, he holds a PhD, as you heard Michael say. He holds a PhD in literature from the University of Birmingham and the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon, which, by the way, is Shakespeare's birthplace. But he also has an MBA from the Wharton School. He teaches English. I should correct that. He teaches freshman comp right now at Gwinnett College in Atlanta, right? But he was also the chief financial officer for a Fortune 1000 company. In my mind, he represents the idealized version of the college experience. He has fused together these seemingly disparate parts, pulled them from all of the diversity of ideas and methods that we have at our disposal at a university, and he makes it feel kind of as natural and everyday as perhaps William Carlos Williams did. Because you know, what was his day job, everyone? He was a physician. And he started most of those great poems on the backs of prescription notes as he was idling in his car between house calls. That's a fact. So yeah, is the news hard to get from poems? Yeah. Is it worth it? Yes. Is it made more meaningful because of that difficulty? Probably. Is it made easier with people like Michael and Andrea Stone? Yes. Is it made that much more easy? Is that right grammatically? That much more easy. I think so. That much easier? That's what I'm looking at. This is the guy who teaches grammar every once in a while. With models like David Weiss, yeah, I think so. He's here tonight to talk to you about the ways in which he's found interconnectivity in places that you would not think to find it. So please help me welcome Dr. David Weiss.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. Wow. I really hadn't anticipated that so many people would be here, so thank you for being here. I appreciate being here for my talk. To quote Shakespeare, how many goodly creatures are there here? So thank you for coming. And thank you, Michael and Chad, for those incredibly generous introductions. Man, that was cool. Thank you. I like that. But before I get started, I need to sincerely thank Michael and Andrea Stone for their incredible generosity and for making this presentation happen. There you go. They deserve it. As you heard from Michael, this talk really came together as a result of his inspiration and initiative. For me, delivering a talk about Shakespeare's influence in my life has been something that I've thought about for years. But this presentation here in Carrollton, this is my first time delivering it. And I can't express how grateful I am to Michael for the opportunity. So thank you. I also thank President Brendan Kelly and Deans Pauline Gagnon and Christopher Johnson and the incredible faculty and staff of UWG, especially Ketty Cusick. Ketty, you're over there, right? Thank you. Your hospitality has been overwhelming and enthusiasm. Thank you very much. Okay, so I know that many of you are there thinking, oh, my screen's not working here. Let me see if I can fix that. I should have checked that. Tori, any chance? Or I can use it here. Okay, so I know that many of you are sitting there thinking that you know nothing about Shakespeare, but I'm sure you do. Let me get this going again. But I'm sure you do. Are you ready? To be or? Hey, there you go. See, you passed the quiz. That wasn't so tough. See, that wasn't so tough. As an English-speaking person, Shakespeare is a part of you. Completing the phrase to be or not to be is almost like an instinctive reaction. In fact, that's not restricted to the English-speaking world. If you were to say to be or to someone from Germany or Russia or South Korea in their own languages, they would know how to complete the phrase. Shakespeare brings us together around the world. In fact, he even does that intergalactically. Let me demonstrate.
I offer a toast. The undiscovered country.
Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
Tach, pa, tach, be.
Thank you, Tori. See, Shakespeare even brings together Klingons and humans. When Hamlet is quoted in Klingon, we all know what's being said. So, let's see. You got it? No. During this talk, I'm going to be discussing why I believe Shakespeare remains important and relevant in the modern world. As you learned from Michael and Chad's introductions, I have an unusual background that gives me a unique perspective on this topic. I have an MBA from the Wharton School, as you heard, and a PhD in English from the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon. Yes, Shakespeare's birthplace. Thank you. As well as undergraduate degrees in accounting and English from the University of Pennsylvania. After undergrad, I started my career. Should we pause? Should we pause? Okay. This will let me move around a little bit more. My apologies. Let's see, maybe I can go into a song and dance. Who has their favorite Shakespeare quotes? I was doing Our Revels Now Are Ended, and someone recognized it out at the audience. Ah, thank you. Okay. Hey, thank you, Tori. Okay, here we go. Now I'm untethered. So after undergrad, I started my career as a certified public accountant. Ultimately, I became the CFO of a newly public company in my early 30s, and then retired in my 40s to pursue my passions, helping to raise my family, getting a PhD in Shakespeare, and teaching English. Throughout my career, I found that many of the skills required for success in the business world are the ones you learn in English. Skills like the ability to communicate effectively. Here's a brief clip from one example of how I use those skills in my job as a CFO.
Joining us from Atlanta today, David Weiss, Beazer Homes CFO. Mr. Weiss, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Maria.
So have you seen a change in business over the last 3 months?
Over the last 3 months, it's been extremely strong. Actually, we've reported earnings for the last quarter up 30% or over 30%. So it's extremely strong. If any change, I would say it's even stronger demand in the lower price points.
Yes, that was me. That was about 20 years ago, and yes, I did have hair then. I don't know where it went. So as I was preparing for that interview on CNBC, I wasn't thinking about what I had learned in accounting or finance. I was thinking about how Henry V had addressed the interests of his audience in his Band of Brothers speech in Shakespeare's play. That's something that I had to do as the CFO of a public company, trying both to reassure investors and to motivate the employees of the company. Shakespeare helped me do that. I'll come back to Henry's speech later. During this talk, I'm going to share with you how Shakespeare's plays helped me both in my personal life and in my business career. But first, let's step back and talk about Shakespeare in the modern world in general. Even though Shakespeare died more than 400 years ago, his works remain an active part of our lives today in a way that I don't believe is true of any other artist or writer. Think about this. Tonight, in most major cities in the English-speaking world, you'll find that a Shakespeare play is being performed. Tonight in Atlanta, for instance, Much Ado About Nothing is on stage at the Shakespeare Tavern. Go to the Shakespeare Tavern, it's a great place. Shakespeare also remains an active part of our popular culture like no other writer or artist. In just the past year, you could have seen a major motion picture of West Side Story, a musical based heavily on Romeo and Juliet. And during this past year, HBO screened the series Station 11, a futuristic story where most of humanity has died from a plague, yet a troupe of actors travels the United States performing Shakespeare. During this past year, there was a big-budget action film called The Northman, about the young son of a king who seeks to avenge his father's murder by his uncle. This movie is obviously based on Hamlet. No, it's The Lion King. What are you guys talking about? Only kidding. Though The Lion King is loosely based on Hamlet, and The Northman is actually based on the same legend that gave rise to that play. But it's The Lion King. It's Hamlet. This has also been a really big year for Macbeth. Many of you probably know the movie of the play, directed by Joel Coen, that starred Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. But you may not know that the first big project that Daniel Craig took on after moving on from his role as James Bond was to appear as Macbeth on Broadway. Lastly, there was a major scandalous event in the entertainment world that you may not realize was caused by the Macbeth curse. You know the Macbeth curse? For centuries, it's been considered bad luck to say the name of the play Macbeth in a theater. You're supposed to refer to it as the Scottish play. I'm sure you know the Scottish play. Which you just said. I'm in big trouble here, aren't I? I've said it a number of times, but especially after I see what happened to this big star who said it just once on stage earlier this year.
Denzel, Macbeth, loved it. Oh, wow. Wow.
One minute later, I bet you didn't realize that that moment was caused by Shakespeare. So I've talked about how Shakespeare's influence is active in the modern world in ways that are not true for any other artist or writer. Why? What makes him so? Different people will give you different answers to that question. For me, it comes down to two things. The first is his understanding of the human psyche. Shakespeare allows us to get into the heads of a wide range of humanity. The second is that Shakespeare helps us raise questions about the world around us and about our interactions with others. How should we act? What should we do? Shakespeare doesn't provide the answers to those questions, but he does provide us with the ability to develop the right questions. I think it's particularly appropriate that Shakespeare's most famous quote, the one we started with, "To be or not to be," is not a statement, it's a question, and it's a big one. Should we live at all? If we live, how should we live? What does it mean to be? I want to share with you a clip from the Royal Shakespeare Company's commemoration of the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death that emphasizes this aspect of the quote. A number of RSC actors, many of them very recognizable, consider how the question should be asked. Let's take a look.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
Sorry. I mean, yes, yes, but if you don't mind a note, or to be or not to be, because it's the choice.
Try this. To be or not to be, that is the question.
No.
To be or not.
No, to be or...
Calm down, right? It's simple.
Or...
Don't lose focus. To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
With all those actors who have been part of the Royal Shakespeare Company, I think it's that guy at the end who gets it right. It's a question. I guess it takes an actual prince to get it right. Although this bit was obviously done for fun, I believe it helps us consider the fact that Hamlet's speech starts with a question. In fact, most of the speech is comprised of questions, and we need to know how to ask those questions if we're going to figure out our own answers to them. Shakespeare helps us do that. And he does so in the most engaging way that I know, by allowing us to get into the head of someone whom we think along with. I believe that part of the reason why the to be or not to be soliloquy is so famous is because it does such an incredible job of that. Let's watch some excerpts from the speech as performed by Papa Essadou, the actor that you just saw in that clip, who was actually playing Hamlet at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time. As we do, notice how he draws us in, how he has us considering the questions along with him. Let's look.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of.
Incredible. To be or not to be? That's probably the biggest question that Shakespeare has us consider. I want to step back now, and I'd like to describe to you some lesser questions, some questions that Shakespeare helped me answer during the course of my life and business career. I'm going to show you how Shakespeare influenced me. I'm not saying that he should play the same role in your life, but I am saying that if you look to his plays and engage with them, perhaps you'll find ways to make them your own and to consider how they can help you consider your own questions, whether they're similar to mine or not. I'm often asked what initially brought me to Shakespeare, and was it something that I studied from my youth? I can definitively say that I was not brought up on Shakespeare. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. Applaud, applaud, applaud. Brooklyn, New York. From a very working class neighborhood. My father was a truck driver for the New York Daily News, and my mom stayed home and raised me and my brother. My family believed in education, and we had lots of books around, but I don't recall that any of them were Shakespeare. I'm sure that I never read or saw a Shakespeare play until my teens. My first real exposure to Shakespeare was in the 9th grade. We read Julius Caesar that year. And I remember being assigned Brutus's speech after Caesar's assassination to memorize. I'm sure I didn't understand it. But I do remember that I enjoyed memorizing the words. The following year, in 10th grade, we read Macbeth. There, I've said it again. Don't come up and punch me. And I memorized the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech. Many here, I'm sure, can do it. Once again, I enjoyed that, but I can't say that I was hooked. Now on to 10th grade. This is when I can definitively say that I got the Shakespeare bug. We were studying A Midsummer Night's Dream. Probably many of you have done that. Now here's a confession. I didn't really read the play. I was busy with other things. Plus, it seemed tough. Shakespearean comedy can be difficult to get when you read it. You really need to see it performed. In any case, instead of reading the play itself, I read a children's version of it from Charles and Mary Lamb's book, Tales from Shakespeare, which is a great book. Armed with my understanding of the play from that book, I was able to do fine on the test. Yeah, she was there, she knows. I got an A. I was happy about that, but it did make me feel guilty. Soon thereafter, there was a production of Midsummer being done at a local theater, and I went to see it. That's it. I was hooked. I thought the play was hilarious. I still do. I remember most being surprised that I could find this really old stuff just laugh out loud funny. It's one thing to read about a pompous, buffoonish man being literally turned into an ass. It's another to see it performed. But this was my first instance of Shakespeare helping me to address issues in my life. It was right at that time when I started dating Maureen Cowie, the woman who I'd marry 5 years later. She's sitting right over there. I believe that A Midsummer Night's Dream had a range of impacts on me, some of which I only realized later. One is that it's okay to be an ass. Sometimes we just can't help it. In the play, the appropriately named character Bottom is turned into a donkey. He's one of a group of actors, amateur actors, who are seeking to put on a play for the Duke on the day of his wedding. He and his fellow actors go out to the woods to rehearse their play, where they encounter a group of fairies, including the mischievous Puck. Puck turns Bottom into a donkey, and after that, the queen of the fairies, Titania, falls in love with him because of a love potion that her husband had given her. Okay, it's complicated. But one thing that I remember that I appreciated right away is that Bottom is presented in a very sympathetic way. He's really earnest, and he wants to do a good job. He just gets lots of things wrong. I completely related to that. I still do. I get lots of things wrong, and at times I can absolutely be an ass. Maybe that's what I'm doing here right now. But at least I'm earnest about it, and I'm trying. I hope that people can have as much empathy for me as Shakespeare encourages us to have for Bottom. Another aspect of Midsummer that really appealed to me and impacted my life is the play's perspective on love. As I mentioned earlier, this is just when I started dating the woman who I would marry five years later. This was really the first serious relationship in my life, the first one where I was truly able to open up with another person. It wasn't easy. I was extremely reserved and kept my deepest feelings to myself. Both Maureen and Shakespeare help me develop the trust to open up to another human being. She might discover that I was an ass, but she might still love me. I believe that this is a big part of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Love is messy and a bit insane. It's unexplainable. It's unexplainable by logic, but it needs to be trusted. And you need to make yourself vulnerable to other people to discover yourself and to experience the magic that can come from falling in love. So the two things that I take from A Midsummer Night's Dream are, one, it's okay to be an ass, and two, trust in the inexplicable but magical elements of love. With that in mind, I'd like to show you some excerpts from a 1999 film of A Midsummer Night's Dream, a film with Kevin Kline as Bottom and Michelle Pfeiffer as Titania. Kline was not the funniest Bottom that I've seen, but I think he does a great job of demonstrating the character's humanity. Let's watch.
If I were fair, Thisbe, I were only thine. Why do they run away? I see their knavery. This is to make an ass of me, to fright me if they could. But I will not stir from this place, do what they can. And I will sing that they shall hear I am not afraid. The wren with little quill.
What angel wakes me from my flowery bed? I pray thee, gentle mortal, sing again. Mine ear is much enamored of thy note. So is mine eye enthralled to thy shape. And thy fair virtues, force perforce, doth move me on the first view to say, to swear, I love thee.
Methinks, mistress, you should have little reason for that. And yet, to say the truth, reason and love keep little company together nowadays.
It's a good one. Reason and love keep little company together nowadays. It seems to me that Bottom, the ass, is pretty wise. I loved A Midsummer Night's Dream. So much so that a few years later, in my junior year of college, I directed a production of it. I'm sure that it's no coincidence that soon thereafter, I had the courage to propose to Maureen. And now here we are, a couple of months ago, having just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. And as you heard from Michael, it's thanks to her that I'm here. She was the first one who met with Michael and Andrea Stone and told them about my desire to do a talk on my experience with Shakespeare in business. Thank you, Maureen. Immediately after graduating from undergrad, I started my business career at the accounting firm of Deloitte in New York. Things went well for me at Deloitte, and on the whole, I liked accounting and business, though I knew from the start that it was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I set my sights on being able to retire early, to do other things. I wasn't sure what those other things would be, but I always knew that theater, literature, and Shakespeare would be a part of it. At Deloitte's New York office, each year, they chose one person a year to go on weekends to the 2-year executive MBA program at the Wharton School in Philadelphia. Fortunately, after 6 years at Deloitte, I was chosen to be that person. It was an extremely difficult program, and that was probably the toughest 2 years of my professional life. I was working 60-plus hours a week in New York and commuting on weekends to Philadelphia. The thing I most remember from it was not getting a good night's sleep for 2 years. But one thing that I remember very fondly was my class in negotiations. It was a great class, run by Professor Richard Schell, who would end up being the head of Wharton's Legal Studies Department. Very, very impressive professor. This class involved a big final project where you were supposed to study a real-life negotiation and evaluate it using the methods that we had studied in class. That didn't really interest me. But what did interest me was applying those methods to Shakespeare's history plays, especially to a series of 4 plays that are sometimes referred to as the Henriad. The plays Richard II, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and Henry V. These plays follow one continuous story, the story of the fight for the English crown, the fight that we now refer to as the Wars of the Roses. I had begun studying these plays on my own and found that for me, they included some of the most important guidance on how to conduct yourself in the business world, how to negotiate, how to lead, how to motivate others. So I approached Professor Schell to see if he would let me write my paper about Shakespeare's history of plays rather than about a real-life negotiation. Fortunately, he agreed. In doing this, I was applying a lesson that I actually learned from those plays, a lesson that I tell my students to apply as well. If you don't like the question, answer another one. Though I also encourage my students to ask me first and get my permission, as I did with Professor Schell. I think that this is a lesson that can be applied to most college classes, so those of you out there, talk to your professors about it, and to many situations in the working world. If you don't want to answer the specific question asked, either because you don't know the answer, or don't like the answer, or are just not interested in the subject, then answer another. Ideally, the question answered should be related, and it must be meaningful. In fact, if meaningful enough, the person who asked you will forget about the original question. This is a lesson that I took from Shakespeare's history plays. In Henry IV, Part 2, King Henry advises his son, Prince Hal, to avoid questions surrounding the family's right to the crown. He advises Hal instead to lead England to war in foreign lands. That's exactly what Hal does when he becomes Henry V. He claims that the King of England also has the right to the French crown, and he gets the approval of the church and the noblemen of England to attack France. He changes the question. I did very well in my paper in the negotiations in Shakespeare's plays, even though I had not addressed the question being asked. More importantly, that paper helped me study Shakespeare's history plays in a way that continues to influence me to this day. It provides the basis of much of my talks on business and Shakespeare. It also helped me study in depth the character that I think Shakespeare holds out as a model of leadership, Henry V. It's not a one-sided presentation. Shakespeare demonstrates many of the negative, Machiavellian things that come with being a leader. But on the positive side, he demonstrates how important it is to know how to motivate and inspire others. This was a lesson that served me throughout my business career, especially when I became the chief financial officer of a far-flung organization and had to motivate employees, thousands of employees across the country. In the play that bears his name, Henry V has one of the most famous speeches in Shakespeare, the St. Crispin's Day speech. This is the speech that includes the line, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers." This speech has been quoted and used in a wide variety of contexts, from Winston Churchill rallying the troops in World War II to the title of the HBO series, Band of Brothers. It's often held up as one of the most motivational speeches ever written, which perhaps it is. Interestingly, however, it is not what Henry originally intended to talk about in his speech. Originally, he was going to rally his troops around the importance of his cause, but he changed his focus completely after he went among his troops, disguised, on the night before the battle. He found that his soldiers had no way of knowing if the cause was right or wrong, and they didn't care. What most interested them, rather, was their own personal interests. They would follow the king into battle because it was their duty, but in order to actually inspire them, he was going to need to refocus the speech into something explaining how they would personally benefit. He turned it into a speech about the honor they would gain if the battle was won. Common soldiers would become brothers of the king. This is not about the glory of the cause. It's about personal benefit. Let's watch some excerpts from the BBC series The Hollow Crown, with Tom Hiddleston as Henry V. This clip shows Henry on the night before battle, followed by a portion of the St. Crispin's Day speech.
Methinks I could not die anywhere so contented as in the king's company. His cause being just and his quarrel honourable.
That's more than we know. Aye, or more than we should seek after. For we know enough if we know we are the king's subjects. If his cause be wrong, our obedience to the king wipes the crime of it out of us.
But if the cause be not good, the king himself hath a heavy reckoning to make.
I myself heard the king say he would not be ransomed.
Aye, he said so to make us fight cheerfully. But when our throats are cut, he may be ransomed, and we ne'er the wiser.
This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall see this day and live old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbours and say, tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. This story shall the good man teach his son. And Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world. But we in it shall be remembered. We few. We happy few. We band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day.
The speech truly is inspiring. It would not have been so had Henry focused on the glory of his cause. No one would have cared or believed him. This is something that I took with me in business. You need to know what motivates the people that work for you and work with you. You can only learn this by working closely with them. You need to focus on their interests, and then you need to design means to get the message out. For instance, incentive compensation systems and communications that demonstrate the alignment of their interests with the company's. I did that as the CFO of a newly public company, designing a compensation system that we called Value Created, in which everyone shared in the profits. You also need to get people emotionally involved. I tried to do that by personally visiting each of the company's offices around the country to roll out the incentive compensation system. Now, I recognize that this is getting increasingly difficult to do, to generate that emotional involvement, as employees are becoming more disenfranchised. But this is not much different than what Henry found from talking to his soldiers on the night before battle. As I said to the students today, hating your job is not a new thing. You didn't invent this. So I think anyone who manages others can take lessons from Henry V. I now come to the end of my business career and my decision to retire. Like so many other issues I had considered in my career, this one was heavily informed by Shakespeare, the question of when and how to walk away. That's one of the principal questions in one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, The Tempest. The Tempest is a play that Shakespeare wrote very late in his career, right before he left London and went into semi-retirement back in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. It takes place on an island where the magician Prospero has been living as a castaway in exile with his daughter, Miranda. Prospero was previously the Duke of Milan, but he had been displaced by his treacherous brother, Antonio. Prospero is in complete control on the island, thanks to his books and his magic staff. As the play begins, a ship carrying Antonio is shipwrecked on the island. The play involves Prospero realizing the limitations of his powers, learning the importance of forgiveness, and giving up his magic in order to return to Milan to see the marriage of his daughter and live out his life. Personally, I found much inspiration from this play to say there's a time to walk away from a situation where you feel in complete control, like my role as the CFO of a public company, and to reset your priorities. Let's watch some excerpts from a film of The Tempest that illustrate what I've just described. Now, one thing that's interesting about this film is that the role of Prospero, a man's role, is played by a woman, Helen Mirren. The name of the character is changed from Prospero to Prospera. This points out another aspect of Shakespeare that I believe makes him unique and modern. there's almost no hesitation to adapt his plays to encompass a new setting or a switch in casting, including gender-neutral and colorblind casting. People have been doing this with Shakespeare for more than a century, dating back at least to the first documented female Hamlet, Sarah Bernhardt. So here's Helen Mirren as Prospera in the film of The Tempest.
I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers oped and led 'em forth by my so potent art. This rough magic I here abjure. I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book.
Oh, wonder. How many goodly creatures are there here? How beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave, new world that has such people in
'Tis new to thee.
You may have recognized that quote, "Brave New World," which was used ironically by Aldous Huxley as the title for his dystopian novel. In the context of the play, it has much more positive connotations. It's the perspective of Miranda, who has been sheltered on the island, seeing mankind for the first time. She says, "How beauteous mankind is. O brave new world that has such people in it." Once again, this is a Shakespeare quote that has significantly influenced my life. It's the quote that Maureen and I used on the birth announcement of our daughter, Sarah Miranda. And yes, her middle name does come from the play. It's also the Shakespeare quote that I used during my speech at Sarah's wedding just a few months ago, as I said that it reflected the positive outlook of she and her new husband, James, as they looked on their brave new world together as husband and wife. As you can see, Shakespeare has meant an awful lot to me for a long time, and he continues to. So, having told you about Shakespeare's influence on my life, how would I answer the question, why Shakespeare? One of the best answers that I've seen to that question is from a book called Shakespeare After All. I assigned it to Michael to read. He's going to be quizzed on it. It's by Marjorie Garber. It includes an introductory overview of Shakespeare and then relatively short essays on each of the plays. It's the book that I recommend to people who are just getting started on Shakespeare and want an introduction. In that book, Garber says, "Every age creates its own Shakespeare. Shakespeare is, in a way, always two playwrights, the playwright of his time and the playwright of our time, whatever time that is." I think she's right, though I would broaden her message to say that he's the playwright of both every time and every person. I believe that everyone who embraces Shakespeare makes their own version of him. We each come up with our own questions that the plays raise for us about how to conduct our lives and how to interact with others. I've told you about my questions. Yours are likely to be different. He speaks to each of us individually, and he means different things to different people. This has been true across time and across cultures. Shakespeare brings us together in a way that is truly unique, and that is something that we increasingly need. This makes Shakespeare more modern than any other author I know. In a moment, I'd love to take your questions, and I truly hope that you have lots of questions. Before that, however, I'd like to end with Prospero's speech from the end of The Tempest. At the very end of the play, after all the other characters have left the stage, Prospero, who has relinquished his magical powers, steps out and talks directly to the audience, begging their favor and telling them that his fate after the play is up to them. The same is true for me. As I said at the start, this is the first time that I've delivered this talk. I'm sure that I can improve on it, and I hope to be able to do it again in the future. But that very much depends on your good words, which Shakespeare calls gentle breath of yours. So with that, I'll turn off my mic, abandon my script, that goes away, turn off the presentation, and tell you, pray you, draw near. Not yet, not yet. Thank you. Now, my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have is mine own, which is most faint. Now, 'tis true I must be here, confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardon the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands, with the help of your good hands. Not yet. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. Thank you. Now you can put it back up again. Okay. Sorry about the glitch at the beginning, but hope it worked out. So now I'd love to take questions. Definitely want them. Go ahead. How about Julius Caesar? I mean, it's funny, in class today, actually, someone asked about, I think Michael asked about Julius Caesar. I mean, Caesar's a fascinating play. Michael asked, for instance, was Caesar narcissistic, egomaniacal? Did he deserve what he got? And the answer is, he certainly got the accolades, but he didn't actually do anything. So Brutus decides to assassinate him. That doesn't seem like a very good idea, and it didn't work out very well for Brutus. So I think, to me, in business, in life, I mean, Brutus, he has great intentions. He works it all on his mind. He works it out with you, but he's just flat out wrong. And so to me, he was, of course, sort of duped by people who told him, oh, you're great, you're wonderful, you really should be leading. But I think you really need to, when you consider political assassination, that's a pretty extreme measure. So, but I think Brutus is a great character, and I think much of what he says is logical. You just need to be careful about that logic. He's too logical. So that's what I would take from. Well, certainly all that is there. I mean, you'll find in the politics of the business world someone who's rising to power and someone else who's jealous of it and will try to undermine them. Actually, the plays that I use for that more than Julius Caesar are Richard II. I don't know the extent to which you've studied it. There's a king who thinks he has absolute power, and you have differing reactions to him, including overthrowing him, which doesn't necessarily work out well either. So to me, that is, if you're working for a boss who thinks they have absolute power, and you need to do your job, how do you deal with it? So that Richard II is more what I would use for that. Thank you for the detailed question. Yeah. Next question. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask what involvement you may have had in theater, I mean, working in avocational or educational professional theater.
So the question is what involvement I had in theater. So in high school, I did act and direct. I acted in The Crucible. And I directed a production of a Woody Allen play called God, which is very funny. And then I ended up actually acting in that play God in college, and I directed A Midsummer Night's Dream in college. But it was, I'll tell you truthfully, when it came to retirement and I thought about what are among the things that I want to do, theater was on the list. But studying academically, Shakespeare appealed to me more. But I was also involved with the Atlanta Shakespeare Company, the Shakespeare Tavern. I was on their board of directors and still fairly involved with that from an administrative standpoint. But I decided the theater world as a vocation was not my thing. In the back.
So when I asked for my personal benefit, I did not grow up reading Shakespeare in English. This is still rough in an English-speaking country. So if you have to tell somebody like me, these are the Shakespeares you want to read, I cannot read them all.
Sure.
So, I don't know, define that somebody who's not familiar must read, and in which order?
Well, here's the thing. Truthfully, it's not a matter. So, did everyone hear the question? Someone who English isn't their first language, they're not used to Shakespeare, but they'd like to learn it. What should they read? Which plays and in what order? Here's the thing. It almost doesn't matter which plays, but what I would say you ought to do is watch it at the same time as reading it. There are wonderful productions by the BBC or various other movies of them. So watch A Midsummer Night's Dream, the one I showed. Watch Macbeth. There was a brand new movie, just came out last year, of Macbeth. That's one that a lot of people find very accessible. But read it and watch it along. Maybe you read it first and then watch it. And when you're watching, get the subtitles. And eventually you'll find you get into the rhythm of it. It doesn't seem as foreign and as, to English-speaking people, sometimes it seems foreign. So I teach English comp, as Professor Davidson talked about, and I use in my class the play Hamilton as one of my principal texts. Now, I don't know how many of you have listened to Hamilton. It takes a while to get used to it. I mean, there are a lot of words. They come really fast. But similarly, if you listen to and watch that play with the subtitles, you start to get into it, and eventually you get used to it. The same is true with Shakespeare. Eventually you start to get used to the language, and so watching it like that, or seeing a production. Which plays? Macbeth, Midsummer Night's Dream. I've said it again, I keep saying it. Macbeth, A Midsummer Night's Dream is wonderful. I wouldn't say Hamlet. It's just very, very, very long. Romeo and Juliet is always an approachable one. So ones that there are big movies of, I would say like that. But I guess I'd have to turn it around and put the question to you. What would, you saw a couple of clips. Is there any Shakespeare play that you think, oh, I'd like to see that?
The comedy that you were talking about.
A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's a great one. The thing I would tell you about A Midsummer Night's Dream is it's really best to actually see it live. The movie's pretty good. It's not all that funny. Shakespeare is fundamentally a theater thing. And that play in particular, when he comes out with the donkey's head on, it's just hilarious. And I haven't yet found a movie that duplicates that moment to me. But the bottom line is try it, in movies, and if you get to see, if Midsummer Night's Dream is being done at the Shakespeare Tavern, go see it there. They actually just did it a few months ago, but they do it every couple of years. So that's a good one. Yes? Okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's the Macbeth curse. You're not going to come punch me, are you? Okay.
What about the problem plays, right? Like the Merchant of Venice,
Yep.
Othello.
Yep. Winter's Tale.
Taming of the Shrew.
Oh, Taming of the Shrew is, and Taming of the Shrew is an interesting one because.
He's a product of his time too.
Right.
But what do they have to do?
Well, I think there are lots of things. Merchant of Venice is probably the one that I've worked with the most. And actually, when I was coming to speak to business classes, I was going to work in the role of trust in business. And to me, Merchant of Venice is a very business-oriented play, and there's a complete lack of trust. When you have a loan between people, you ought to have some element of trust, because ultimately, if it's not there, it doesn't work out well. But Merchant of Venice seems like an anti-Semitic play in a lot of ways. To me, it's not, but it certainly has anti-Semitism in it. Taming of the Shrew seems to have some misogynistic elements to it. So the answer is to discuss them openly, to deal with it. Some of it is a product of its time. Some of it, he was ahead of his time. So giving Shylock, the villain, as a Jew, this wonderful speech, hath not a Jew eyes, if you prick us, do we not bleed? What is that? So the fact that all these characters, and by the way, there's bigotry throughout it. It's not just anti-Semitism. It's a play very much about bigotry. So I think you still deal with it, and you address those things head on. Actually, the Shakespeare Tavern just did Merchant of Venice, actually an all-female production of it. And I went to a discussion they had about and the woman playing Shylock is a religious Jewish woman. And they talked about dealing with those issues and how they chose to deal with it. So, and it's not easy and it's not clean. It's not, these things are messy. And I think you deal with that messiness. I certainly don't think we don't teach them. The speech at the end of Taming of the Shrew, very uncertain how it should be played. Measure for Measure, she's silent and is whisked off. Though you mentioned the problem plays, my favorite problem play is a play called The Winter's Tale, which I think it's a problem play not because of anything controversial currently. It just has a bizarre plot, and it has tragedy and it has comedy, but it's a beautiful, beautiful play. So I recommend that. Hope that answered. Yes?
You ever use Shakespeare in your freshman comp class?
I thought about it, and other than very brief references by telling them there were quotes in Hamilton from Shakespeare, no. It's in dealing with freshman comp, I really have to create a connection, and maybe late in the course I could, and I certainly talk about my Shakespeare stuff, and my students know I'm here doing this, and they're very enthusiastic for that. But having them study, say, a Shakespeare sonnet or a Shakespeare play, I feel is an extra level of dauntingness to basic English composition. Maybe that's because I'm a relatively new teacher. I've just been doing it 3 or 4 years. But that's, so instead I try to use materials. Hamilton really engages them. I use Narrative of Life of Frederick Douglass, which I think is a phenomenal book. And even that, they start to feel like the language is antiquated, and they start to complain about it a bit. So I think it's a challenge. I mean, I'd like to. When I first started doing it for English comp, I thought maybe I could do that. But it's not a challenge I'm ready for. Oh, thank you. Yes?
Hi. What would you say is, the best adaptation? Out of all the adaptations of Shakespeare's plays you've seen, which one do you feel best portrays the characters and really gets the themes and dramatic tension the best?
Okay, in terms of a movie, you're asking.
Movie, play, whatever it could be.
I mean, so the question is, which did I consider the best adaptation? My favorite Shakespeare production that I ever saw was in London at, there's a replica of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. And I got to see Henry IV parts 1 and 2 there. And there's a character named Falstaff who was extremely popular at Shakespeare's time. And I've never entirely understood it until I saw it there. And he was like a rock star in front of the audience. He was just had them all going. So that's my favorite live production I've ever seen. In terms of seeing something, there isn't one definitive best or the one. My favorite Macbeth is the Roman Polanski Macbeth. Now, getting at your problem issues, lots of problems with watching any Roman Polanski movie, and it was produced by Playboy Enterprises, so it's got serious issues. Sorry, it's still a great movie. So that's my favorite Macbeth. The new Macbeth is very good, but it does some bizarre cuts that actually I think make a relatively simple play more complicated. So that I think is unfortunate, but it is very well done as a movie. So I showed clips from The Hollow Crown, which I think are very good. If you're interested in the history plays, there are great adaptations of them. But my favorite individual play of a film of a history play is Kenneth Branagh's Henry V. That's, I think, very accessible and does a good job of it. So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Which Shakespeare work do you think you pulled the most business aids and tidbits from?
Richard II. So the question is, which individual work did I pull the most from? It's a very complicated issue, so it's not the sort of thing I'm going to talk about at a talk like this, but in terms of working it in. But it starts with, I mentioned earlier, working for someone who thinks they have absolute power, what I call a narcissistic boss. And I don't mean narcissism in its extreme negative sense, just people who believe they have absolute power. And it deals with the issue of the divine right of kings, the idea that someone was appointed by God and can't be challenged. And sometimes you hear, well, there's not really a modern concept like that. I can tell you the CEO is a modern concept like that. Elon Musk has the divine right of kings. And if you find yourself working for Elon Musk, directly or indirectly, how are you going to do your job? Do you challenge them? Do you try to act political and try to undermine them? Do you appease them? How do you do it? Personally, there's a character in that who's not one of the major characters. His name is O'Merle. I see him as the trusted advisor, and that's the role that I always took in business. I would like to be the person. I'm not the top guy. I'm near the top, and I'm advising, and in advising a narcissistic boss, who I had to work for, you try to explain to him why decisions he's about to make are not in his best interest. And everything is focused on him. So that's a play that meant an awful lot to me, and it was a centerpiece of that paper on negotiations that I wrote in graduate school. I love the history plays. Thank you.
Yeah, in contrast, with respect to one Shakespearean play versus another, that you might enjoy from the seat of a leather chair with a pipe in your hand versus the one you see on theater.
Yeah.
Could you polarize two of them?
Sure. No, so the question is, which one would I prefer to read with my pipe in my hand and be a cigar, with a cigar and just reading as opposed to going to see? Well, first off, before I answer that question, and I do have an answer to that question, let me say all of your questions, I'm giving you my own personal opinion. You'll have your own. And that's part of what I'm talking about, is that I love Richard II. In Henry IV and Henry V, I love Prince Hal. Maureen hates Prince Hal. She thinks he's a Machiavellian bastard. So everyone has their own interpretation. So in terms of reading versus seeing it performed, to me, the play King Lear, I've never seen a production that fully does what I think is in there. It seems like something that's almost more meant to be read than to be seen. There's just too much. In any one production, some emphasize, the cruelty of it. King Lear. So I find that a play that I enjoy more rereading than seeing it, although I do enjoy seeing it, and there are some good films of it. Ian McKellen did a very good film of it. Laurence Olivier has a good film of it. But that's one that I think it's one of the greatest works of art ever, but it's more to be read than to be seen, that one, to me. Hamlet, I think it's just too damn long. And truthfully, my own opinion is it wasn't written to be performed in its entirety. It was written in part to be read. But I could argue that with Shakespeare scholars who disagree with me about it. So Hamlet also is one that I'd sort of rather read than see. But The Winter's Tale, that I'd see every time. I cry every time at the end of that play. That I'd rather see.
You need to see the National Theater's film of King Lear with Simon Russell Field.
Oh, okay. Okay, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. I did see Anthony Sher perform it at the RSC. That was great. Yeah. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
If someone can only read one of Shakespeare's plays, what would you say they should read?
So they only are going to read it and not see it. Right. So then I can't do A Midsummer Night's Dream because you got to see that. Yeah, I understand. This is our marriage, 40 years. So if I had to choose, I have to choose one play that's the play which is similar to your question that you ought to read. It's probably Macbeth. It's a leading question. It's my wife's favorite play, so. No. I do think it's a very accessible play. It's got witches, they're fun, it's short. Yes?
I don't know if you talked about this, but what lessons could you learn from Romeo and Juliet?
Well, Romeo and Juliet, first off, I don't know that I necessarily take from business, except the fact that so what lessons do I take from Romeo and Juliet? I mean, certainly you've got these warring factions that could be like a business situation, and the fact that that impacts these young people. But Romeo and Juliet is a very personal play. It's not a very political play. Certainly it's a beautiful play. It's got some incredible language. To me, there's misinterpretations of Romeo and Juliet that it's, quote, romantic. No. These are youngsters who are acting on their, basest impulses and getting together. Yeah, their families hate each other, but look, it's a bad idea, and it doesn't turn out well for them. So maybe I would take that. But that's one of those that it's a very domestic sort of play. It has a little bit of, but it's not one of my favorites, to be truthful. And if there's others here who it is their favorite and want to answer this and do a better job of me of the lessons to be taken from Romeo and Juliet. So that's just one of those. It's not my play. Okay, Andrea. She reports on you.
As a child and always.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful play. I just what soft, what light through yonder window breaks. Okay, I saw a hand over there.
You mentioned historical plays. Do those reflect what actually happened, or is that Shakespeare's adaptation?
So I'm sorry, the historical plays you're saying, is it?
Yeah, like Julius Caesar and Venus and Brutus.
You're asking, are they true to history? Yeah. No. I mean, it's similar to Hamilton, though. I don't know if you know the play Hamilton. There are a lot of liberties taken with it. So Shakespeare wrote these English history plays, and he wrote Roman history plays. Some are closer to history than others. The play Richard II is probably relatively close to history. Henry V has elements close. Richard III is not history. It's an evil villain, and Shakespeare created the character of Richard III that we now think of as Richard III. So, but the bottom line, he was writing plays. He was trying to entertain. So he did stick to the significant elements of history, but if he had things to adapt that made it more entertaining or proved a point, he would do that. So it shouldn't be read as history. But they all have major things that are true. I mean, Julius Caesar was assassinated by those very people, and there's a triumvirate after him that are the same people. Antony and Cleopatra has a lot of history. So there are elements, but he strays from it very frequently. They're works of art, certainly more than history. But we know more about Richard III or Richard II because of Shakespeare. So that's part of history. That's in the play Hamilton. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story. How history is written depends upon what it is, what history means, what it is. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, yes.
How was your experience directing Midsummer Night's Dream, and if you had the chance, what other Shakespeare play would you direct?
So the question was, how was it directing A Midsummer Night's Dream? And if I had the chance, would I direct another Shakespeare play? It was wonderful, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about that play. Maureen liked it, so that was good. So as I said, it appealed to me initially in high school, but getting to direct it, you just get to know it in a very different way, in ways that stick with me to this day. The beauty of the language and how to generate laughter in it, because I think if you don't laugh in it, you're not getting it right. So I really enjoyed that. If I got to direct again, say the Shakespeare Tavern said to me, okay, you got a chance, you get to direct a play, it would probably be one of the history plays. It would probably be either Richard II or Henry IV, parts 1 or 2. Those are ones that have come to mean an awful lot to me, and I'd like to explore them even in greater depth. So that's it. Okay, we'll do one last, because this has been going on for a long time. One last question. Anyone? Thank you.
I was curious, what was your dissertation topic for your...
Wow. Do you have an hour? Yes. So the question is, what was my dissertation topic? So I actually studied a poet who wrote at the same time as Shakespeare named Samuel Daniel. How many people have heard of Samuel Daniel? Oh, you have over there. Yes, I know you have. Have you heard of Samuel? Heard it? All right. So Samuel Daniel was a poet who wrote at the same time as Shakespeare, and also a general writer. So what in particular I studied of his, he wrote a very long poem, an epic poem about the Wars of the Roses called The Civil Wars Between the Houses of Lancaster and York. And Shakespeare used that as a source for Richard II and Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. And I studied the interaction between their works and found that there was much more back and forth. And Samuel Daniel was more of like a court poet. He was more, a poet of the nobility. And so I believe Shakespeare was in that world to some extent. And I had a number of things that were part of it, but a big, quote, discovery was there's a manuscript of this poem, or part of this poem. I didn't discover the manuscript, but I interpreted it differently. And I believe that Shakespeare may have used that early manuscript instead of or in addition to the printed version, because there are things in there that were not printed that I think influenced Richard II. And I got to deal with that manuscript at the British Library. So I might have held something that Shakespeare held. So that was pretty cool. So so I did my dissertation. I had an article in Huntington Library Quarterly, which is a good respected journal, that talked about that manuscript. And perhaps most importantly, I rewrote Samuel Daniel's Wikipedia page. So he is a great. And as far as I'm concerned, that's my greatest contribution to English literature. Because my thesis, not that many people are going to read it. That Samuel Daniel page, about 1,000 people a month look at that. So take a look at Samuel Daniel. Yeah. Here, advance to the next slide. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Stay in touch. Thank you. I genuinely appreciate it. And thank you, Michael and Andrea Stone and EWG. Thank you.